A good day, everyone. The World Health Organization endorses patient blood management and hemovigilance. In celebration of the World Blood Donor Day, the topic that had been tasked to me is PBM in low resource setting. How we do it. I'm Dr. Angie Mirasol, and I will be your speaker for this topic this morning. In this session, we will be going through the what and why of patient blood management, the implementation process, and how we do it in our institution. We emphasize on the need for the informed consent and have case-based scenarios, and then moving forward on our key messages. Allow me to start with the policy brief from the World Health Organization on the urgent need to implement PBM. Shown here is the global prevalence of anemia, blood loss, and bleeding disorders and their etiologies, and the three pillars of patient blood management, which starts with the detection and management of anemia and iron deficiency in Pillar 1, minimization of blood loss and optimization of coagulation in the second pillar, and on the third pillar, leveraging and optimizing the patient's specific physiological tolerance of anemia. With regards to implementing patient blood management, the model is Australia. They have shown improved patient outcomes with regards to mortality, infection, stroke, and myocardial infarction, as well as the length of stay, improve key program indicators, as well as reduction in units of blood transfused. These resulted in improved product cost savings as well as activity-based cost savings. And who will benefit? All of us will benefit, from healthcare professionals to the hospitals, health insurance, and the health authorities. So why should we implement? There's scientific evidence, including the real-world evidence. A strong economic argument can be made in terms of cost effectiveness, alleviated cost constraints, and almost immediate returns on investment. Having this, there's an ethical obligation not to ignore and withhold medical models that is beneficial. So, what is patient blood management and how did it develop and what are the underlying principles? Originally, this was developed to improve outcomes in surgical patients, but we do know that these can also be applied in medical conditions. So, PBM is defined as an evidence based, multidisciplinary approach to optimizing care of patients who might need transfusion. So the overarching aim of PBM is to improve patient safety and clinical outcomes while saving healthcare resources and reducing costs. In 2010, this was endorsed by WHO during the Assembly Resolution. And these are the different underlying principles, from managing anemia in Pillar 1 to optimizing coagulation and the blood conserving measures in Pillar 3. And now we have a fourth pillar, the patient-centered decision making. All these geared towards improve patient outcomes. So let me again emphasize the different causes of anemia and likewise concerns to be focused on. Aside from iron deficiency, there are more than 600 million with regards to obstetric and peripartum bleeding among them and the hemoglobinopathies among the hematological. From the study of FNRI among anemic individuals in Metro Manila, the most common cause was iron deficiency anemia. This was followed by anemia due to other causes, and then hemoglobinopathy. The most prevalent form of hemoglobinopathy was alpha thalassemia trait. PBM encompasses a holistic approach to the use of your clinical practice guidelines on blood products for each individual patient. This uses the premise of why transfuse rather than why not. This focuses on the need to carefully balance benefits and potential harm. PBM has the patient at its center, and this aims to maximize hemoglobin perioperatively, minimize blood loss, and this includes your frequent phlebotomy process resulting to anemia, and the use of your alternatives to transfusion where these are available and feasible, including your point of care such as your ROTEM and other techniques. So note that transfusion avoidance or minimization stems from the belief that blood and its components are biological products. So transfusion is a form of liquid transplant, the effects of which are not fully understood and have the potential for unwanted consequences. So these are the different adverse reactions that may occur from acute hemolytic reactions, and now we have increasing trends of your volume overload or transfusion associated circulatory overload as well as your trolley. The following are the general principles of implementing PBM program. First is education. It's important to have a champion who is a knowledgeable advocate. Then we have the executives and then the core group. You have your pharmacy, nursing, and the blood bank. So any department involved in blood transfusion and PBM activities should be a part. Your ordering clinicians, finance, information technology. So these are actually the composition in your hospital blood transfusion committee. Then two is the buy-in from your executives. So you involve your CEO, your medical executive committee, so showing them the blood utilization and the transfusion committee as well as the surgical services committee reports, especially the consumption of your blood in the hospital. Then the third is business proposal. So you start with knowing the background and the current environment, the program description as well as financial aspects and the risk and benefit analysis of all this program, then summarize and have a conclusion. So it's important to have a teamwork. So this is broad-based stakeholder group of those affected by your PBM program. So this is multidisciplinary emphasis, identifying your concerns, details to be addressed, as well as enhanced buy-in. So smaller, more focused steering committees may also be included. So there should be effective meetings as well as milestone collaborations. Then at the end, you have your evaluation of all the study, the analysis, and possible program expansion. Also take note of hemovigilance reports. With all this, it's important to have a conclusion, an evaluation, and improvement of the system. Everyone involved in the transfusion of blood components should be involved in PBM. This requires leadership and support at every level, including healthcare professionals and the hospital trust management, as well as regional and national organizational support if we are to realize its true potential. So this starts with the establishment of a multidisciplinary PBM program through your hospital transfusion committee or as a subgroup. Policies may be based from evidences shown in the three pillars as used perioperatively initially. So this was endorsed by the WHO and international organizations. So we have other useful materials. First from your Choosing Wisely campaign of your AABB. And this is one policy why give to when one will do, among others. So now we go to the next step, which is identifying PBM champions. So they should have the passion and competences needed for the task. Then we have obtaining mandate for PBM from the hospital. So we started the anemia and patient blood management clinic where we started consultations and management of perioperative and other medical and surgical conditions. So these include your patients declining transfusion. Then we have educating clinicians about PBM and evidence-based transfusion practice. Allow me to share with you the recently concluded PBM workshop at the Philippine General Hospital. So all of this later on needs further documentation, evaluation, and improvement in the program. This is an example of an algorithm that we follow for a surgical consult concerning patients who may actually refuse blood transfusion. Ideally, this should start 4 to 6 weeks prior to the procedure for adequate preparation. Shown here are the different laboratories that we may request, and then with referral to hematology service, we assess them, then manage them accordingly prior to the procedure. So let's have two case scenarios. This is the latest guideline on hemoglobin cutoffs defining anemia in individuals and population. Anemia is defined among adults, women less than 120 hemoglobin, and men less than 130. Severe anemia is defined with a hemoglobin less than 80. Among pregnant patients, these are the values, and less than 70 hemoglobin is considered severe anemia. Let's have our first case study. We have AOG, a 31 female, on her first pregnancy, presenting at the 24th week AOG, a Jehovah's Witness patient. Her hemoglobin is 80, with her RBC at 5.1, with MCV at 68, MCH 24, WBC at 5.2, and platelet at 235. Her serum ferritin is 10. What guidance can be provided to assist in the care of maternity patients in whom transfusion is not an option? The following are situations wherein blood transfusion may not be a management option. First is due to personal choice. Second is religious and or cultural beliefs, like in Jehovah's Witness patients. Third is presence of real blood groups or complex antibodies. You have your Kell-Kidd-Duffy antibodies or unavailability of blood products. Observational studies suggest an increased risk of morbidity and mortality in such circumstances. This is with substandard care, including delayed decision making, and this contributes to poorer outcomes. As expert opinion points on the maternal care of patients in whom transfusion is not an option, in all patients, it is good clinical practice to optimize the hemoglobin during the antenatal period, minimize blood loss during birth, and in the event of hemorrhage, secure hemostasis as a matter of urgency. Next is to arrest significant and life-threatening hemorrhage, and when transfusion is not an option, the definitive procedure to minimize ongoing blood loss is hysterectomy, which must be considered and acted upon early. Then, it is important to note that early identification of women for whom transfusion is not an option is vital, enabling a comprehensive multidisciplinary plan to be developed and implemented. In any situation where refusal of transfusion may affect the health of the fetus, like there's profound maternal antenatal anemia, intrauterine transfusion, obtain legal advice and complete relevant documentation as per jurisdictional requirements. Let's go back to our patient. This case demonstrates how a comprehensive PBM program can significantly improve the patient's hemoglobin while reducing blood loss during delivery. Early in the antenatal period, it's important to identify women for whom provision of transfusion support is not an option, as in our case, a Jehovah's Witness patient. Pregnant women are usually offered anemia screening at booking and at 28-week age of gestation. These, however, may be done more frequently when indicated. During the preoperative optimization, the patient is given oral iron supplementation having iron deficiency, and during the second and third trimester was given intravenous iron. She also received folic acid and nutritional advices. The benefit of this pillar is increasing hemoglobin, minimizing possible intra-op loss, and reducing the need to transfuse. At 36 weeks, the patient was in labor. The hemoglobin went up now to 95, and there was an indication for cesarean section, which is the failure to progress in labor with abnormal fetal monitoring. So, as intraoperative strategies, the patient was given tranexamic acid prior to the CS. Then, meticulous surgical technique was then provided. The benefit of this pillar is reducing immediate transfusion needs and preventing expenses as well as the risk. Post-operatively, we followed restrictive transfusion protocols, and intravenous iron infusion was provided. We also monitored the laboratories, and the benefit of this pillar avoids unnecessary transfusion, preserving resources, and preventing complications. So now, the patient was found out to have thalassemia intermedia, which is your hemoglobin H, and this was done post-delivery. Shown in this slide is the algorithm of suggested approach to diagnosis and management of iron deficiency anemia in pregnancy. The use of your oral iron and intravenous iron have been applied to our patient with Jehovah's Witness. And how do you compute for the intravenous or iron deficit? We make use of your Gansoni formula, as shown. But you may also use an online calculator with the Gansoni formula to compute for your iron deficit and how you may actually plan for correcting the deficit in your patient. So, thalassemia has a spectrum. We have the so-called non-transfusion dependent thalassemia, and with regards to our patient, especially during pregnancy, there may be an increased risk for the need of transfusion because of the concomitant anemia. In optimizing patients' health, it is important to ensure good outcomes for pregnancy or fertility treatment among patients with thalassemia. So this needs a multidisciplinary review and likewise management. What is important in this situation is pre-pregnancy planning, and this is key to a successful pregnancy. Guidelines aim to ensure the health and safety of both the mother and baby during pregnancy. It is essential for patients to work closely with their healthcare providers to manage their condition effectively. We have here an example of a protocol for pre-op evaluation and management of cytopenias in patients with Jehovah's Witness. Initially, we do the history and physical examination, especially for bleeding disorders. Then, advanced directives identifying individuals accepting plasma derived products. So, all patients are evaluated by a multidisciplinary team. So these include your surgeons, anesthesiologists, and hematologists, after which an acceptable pre-op hemoglobin target was determined. The laboratory studies included your CBC with red cell indices, iron studies, as well as other needed like your vitamin B12 if indicated or folate levels, and they would be obtained when clinically indicated. So patients with isolated iron deficiency will be treated with parenteral iron alone, and those with anemia of chronic inflammation were treated with erythropoietin combined with your parenteral iron. As of March 20, 2026, the governing body of Jehovah's Witness updated its medical guidance. They now allow members to decide whether to undergo autologous blood collection. So the following are actually the changes. The patient can accept his or her own blood. This can be stored and reused, and there is now more emphasis on individual decision and flexible approach. So what stayed the same? They don't accept donor blood, no major components like red cells, plasma, and personal religious conviction. So this is shown in this figure. What is accepted are red cell fractions, white cell fractions, plasma fractions, and platelet fractions. Let's go to our second case. We have a 57 male, no nasopharyngeal carcinoma, post chemotherapy and radiation. He had a 2-day chest pain, shortness of breath with cough and fever, resulting to his admission. His parameters showed a hemoglobin at 68, leukocyte at 19.1 with segmental predominance, and a platelet count at 22. What blood components would you recommend for the patient? Here we gave the patient 1 unit packed red cell. So this is actually based from the restrictive guidelines from the AABB manual. Noted here a threshold of 7 grams per deciliter for patients who do not have major hemorrhage or acute coronary syndrome or need long-term transfusion. In acute coronary syndrome, we go for the threshold of 8 grams per deciliter. So clinicians should consider setting individual targets for patients with chronic anemia. So these guidelines are as well similar to others internationally. How about platelet transfusion? In here, transfusion of platelet is not recommended. In here, we have a hypoproliferative thrombocytopenia because of the chemotherapy, and usually we have a threshold of around 10. So note that we do not treat the numbers, but we treat the patient. So these are correlated with the clinical status of the patient. These are just some key learning points on patients with malignancy. The approach to anemia and thrombocytopenia should focus on simultaneous interventions, stimulating your erythropoiesis, enhancing hemostasis, and the control or prevention of ongoing blood loss. Anemia in cancer may be multifactorial, and treatment should be directed based on the etiologies. So we have alternatives to transfusion, and these should be maximized. In platelet transfusions, these may be required in the care of patients with cancer, but their use should be restrictive and individualized. So here are some general principles in blood transfusion. In an emergency where it is not feasible to get consent, information on blood transfusion should be provided retrospectively. So the reason for giving blood and a note of the patient consent discussion with this should be documented in the patient's case notes. Informed consent is vital prior to blood transfusion. As the subto noted, following a consultation exercise, looking at consent for transfusion, recommendation is to have valid consent for transfusion obtained wherever possible before administering a transfusion. While this does not entail specific written consent, valid consent does require the provision of information to patients on the risks and benefits together with alternatives available with clear documentation in the clinical records. This is an evidence level 4. Let us move on. It is important to distinguish between PBM and rational blood use. The goal of PBM is not reducing blood transfusion. PBM may preempt the use of blood by placing importance on the patient's own blood. This is long before transfusion is even considered. So the reduction in the number of transfusions simply follows as a direct result. The principle here is a paradigm shift from focusing on the products to the patient. In 2025, the WHO published a guidance on implementing PBM to improve global blood health status. This is a guide for health authorities considering PBM as a national standard of care. So the concept of blood health is central to the understanding and management of blood as an organ with its integrated organ systems and is at the core of patient blood management. So blood health. This is analogous to your heart health, digestive health, and others. And this is the condition where blood optimally performs the intended physiologically functions of its individual components. So this is a very busy slide on the tools and strategies from the WHO 2025 implementation guidelines. So more of these strategies and tools. So here we see the continuum of care aiming for improved blood health in women at risk for postpartum hemorrhage at the rural area level. So in here, the barangay health workers are also being mobilized. And this is also an example regarding major elective surgical procedures. In the interest of time, I would recommend that you get a copy of this and make use of whatever information they may provide. Let us again reiterate why PBM. We know that blood is scarce, costly, and as an organ, it entails a lot of potential adverse reaction. PBM ensures that decision to transfuse is made with careful attention to risk and benefits. There's information encouraging patient participation in transfusion decision. Likewise, this uses state-of-the-art techniques to avoid the need for transfusion. We have advanced planning and PBM conserves the blood supply. Likewise, every drop of blood counts, and the patient is given the blood that is needed and none of the blood that is not indicated. The key message is patient safety, evidence based medicine, and patient empowerment. The concept of PBM may be new to a lot of us, but this is already the norm. We may ask, is there a training on PBM? One of the international organizations active in promoting PBM is your SABAM, or the Society for the Advancement of Patient Blood Management. They offer online certificate courses and have several educational materials in their website. The largest audience and objectives are shown in here. And you may actually enroll from these programs. So in 2026, they will have the annual meeting just in case you are interested. As key messages, we need a national PBM program in the Philippines. But for now, each hospital can still integrate this to their hospital transfusion committee. They may still call it as PBM or Hemovigilance or PBM and Hemovigilance Committee. We need champions, and they need to be identified and supported. So in here, transfusion practice is based on evidence and not on historical or cultural practice. So blood transfusion is only given when the benefit outweighs the risk. So there's also a decision process involving the patient. So transfusion related risks are reduced, included human error and adverse events. Patient outcomes improve regarding morbidity, mortality, and recovery rates, and the hospital length of stay. At the moment, there is definitely a dire need for a registry of rare blood types. Allow me to share some quotations before I end. Cure sometimes, treat often, and comfort always. And from Sir William Osler, the good physician treats the disease, the great physician treats the patient who has the disease. Marami pong salamat sa inyong lahat on behalf of the PGH family. Thank you and have a great day, everyone.